The snow fell heavy and silent across the Texas plains, and Caroline Bishop was on her knees in it, her fingers pressed together so tightly they had gone white. She had been praying for 3 hours now, her dress soaked through, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold, but she would not stop because there was nothing else left to do. The year was 1883, and winter had come to West Texas with a vengeance nobody expected. Marfa was a small town, barely more than a few buildings clustered along the railroad tracks, and most folks had enough supplies to last through the harsh weather. But Caroline was not most folks. She was alone now, completely alone, and the small cabin she had shared with her father sat empty behind her, its door swinging open in the wind because she could not bear to be inside it anymore. Her father had died 4 days ago. The consumption had taken him slowly, then all at once, and she had buried him herself in the frozen ground behind the cabin. It had taken her 2 full days to dig the hole deep enough, her hands blistering and bleeding, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and grief. She was 22 years old and had no other family, no money and no prospects. The cabin was not even theirs. They had been renting it from a man in town who would surely come collecting soon, and when he did, Caroline would have nothing to give him, so she prayed. She prayed because it was the only thing left, the only hope she could cling to in the face of everything that had crumbled around her. The wind howled across the plains, picking up the fresh snow and hurling it against her face, but she kept her eyes closed and her lips moving. She did not know what she was asking for anymore. A miracle, perhaps, some sign that God had not forgotten her out here in this desolate place. The sound of hooves cutting through the snow made her eyes snap open. At first, she thought she had imagined it, that the cold had finally gotten to her brain and she was hearing things. But then she saw him, a dark figure on horseback emerging from the white curtain of falling snow, moving slowly toward her. She struggled to her feet, her legs barely able to support her weight after kneeling for so long. The man on the horse was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a heavy coat that was dusted with snow. His hat was pulled low over his face, and for a moment, Caroline felt a spike of fear. Out here alone, a woman could not be too careful, but as he drew closer, he raised one hand in a gesture that seemed meant to reassure her. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough but not unkind. "Are you all right?" It was such a simple question, and yet it broke something inside her. She tried to answer, tried to say that yes, she was fine, but instead a sob escaped her throat and her knees buckled. The man was off his horse in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," he said, and his arms were strong and steady around her. "Easy, I have got you." Caroline tried to push away from him, tried to find her dignity again, but her body would not cooperate. She was so cold, colder than she had ever been in her life, and this stranger's warmth was the first comfort she had felt in days. She sagged against him, shaking violently, and heard him curse under his breath. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, but she could not answer. Her teeth were chattering too hard. He did not wait for a response. Instead, he scooped her up into his arms like she weighed nothing at all and carried her toward the cabin. The door was still swinging in the wind, and he pushed it open with his boot and carried her inside. The cabin was barely warmer than outside. The fire had died hours ago, and the small room was filled with shadows. The man set Caroline down on the single bed in the corner and immediately went to the fireplace. He worked quickly, efficiently, building a new fire from the small stack of wood that remained. Within minutes, flames were crackling to life, and the first hints of warmth began to seep into the frozen air. Caroline watched him through blurred eyes. She could see more of him now in the firelight. He had a strong, weathered face, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. His hair was dark, almost black, and his jaw was covered with several days' worth of stubble. He looked like he was in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. There was something about the way he moved, a kind of quiet competence, that made her feel safer than she had in a long time. "My name is Samuel Vance," he said, turning to look at her. "I am a ranch hand, working for the Triple Creek Ranch about 15 miles north of here. I was riding through when I saw you out there." He paused, studying her face. "What were you doing on your knees in the snow, praying?" Caroline managed to say, her voice barely more than a whisper. Samuel's expression shifted, something like understanding crossing his features. "For what?" "A miracle." He was quiet for a moment, then moved closer to the bed. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes. You are going to catch your death otherwise." Caroline felt her face flush despite the cold. "I cannot. I am sorry. I know you are trying to help, but I cannot." Samuel held up his hands. "I understand, but at least let me get you some blankets. Do you have any?" She nodded toward the trunk at the foot of the bed. Samuel opened it and pulled out 2 thick quilts, which he draped over her carefully. Then he went back to the fire and began searching through the cabin's meager supplies. He found a small pot and filled it with snow from outside, then set it to heat over the flames. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Caroline tried to remember. Time had become strange since her father died. "Yesterday, I think. Maybe the day before." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he did not say anything. He continued to work, and soon the smell of something cooking filled the cabin. He had found her last bit of dried beef and was making a thin broth. It was not much, but it was something. When it was ready, he brought it to her in a tin cup. "Drink this slowly," he said. "Your stomach is probably not used to much right now." Caroline took the cup with shaking hands and sipped at the hot liquid. It burned going down, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Samuel settled himself on the floor near the fire, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. "My father died," Caroline said suddenly, the words tumbling out. "4 days ago. I buried him outside. I do not have anyone else. I do not have any money. I do not know what to do." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected to see. Compassion. Real, genuine compassion. "I am sorry," he said simply. "That is a hard thing to carry alone." "I was praying for help," Caroline continued, and now that she had started talking, she could not seem to stop. "I know that probably sounds foolish to you, but I had nowhere else to turn. I thought maybe if I prayed hard enough, God would send me some kind of sign, some way forward." Samuel was quiet again, then he said, "Maybe he did." Caroline looked at him, confused. "I was not supposed to be riding this way today," Samuel explained. "My boss sent me to check on some cattle in the north pasture, but I got turned around in the snow. I have been wandering for the better part of an hour trying to find my bearings. If I had not gotten lost, I never would have come across your cabin. I never would have seen you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caroline felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny spark of hope that she had thought was completely extinguished. "What is your name?" Samuel asked. "Caroline Bishop." "Well, Miss Bishop, here is what we are going to do. You are going to rest tonight and get your strength back. Tomorrow morning, if the snow has let up, I am going to take you back to the Triple Creek Ranch with me. The owner, Mr. Harrison, he is a good man. His wife passed a few years back, and he has been looking for someone to help with the cooking and cleaning around the main house. It is honest work, and it comes with room and board. I think I can convince him to give you the job." Caroline stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that for me? But you do not even know me." "No," Samuel agreed. "But I know what it is like to be alone and desperate. Someone gave me a chance once when I needed it. Maybe it is time I did the same for someone else. Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks, but this time they were not tears of despair. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Samuel gave her a small smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Get some rest now. I will keep the fire going." Caroline lay back on the bed, pulling the quilts tight around her. The warmth was seeping into her bones now, and with it came an exhaustion so profound she could barely keep her eyes open. But before she drifted off, she looked at the man sitting by her fire, this stranger who had appeared out of the snow like an answer to a prayer. And she thought that maybe miracles were real after all. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and frightened, but each time she saw Samuel still sitting by the fire, keeping watch, and she was able to fall back asleep. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving everything blanketed in pristine white. Samuel had already been outside, she could tell. He had brought in more wood for the fire and had somehow managed to find a few eggs from the small chicken coop behind the cabin. "I did not know you had chickens," he said when he saw her sitting up. "They are half frozen, poor things, but still alive. I brought them inside and put them in a box by the fire. They should warm up all right." Caroline smiled at the thought of the chickens huddled by the fire. Her father had loved those chickens. He had named each one and talked to them like they were people. "Thank you for taking care of them." "We will bring them with us," Samuel said. "Mr. Harrison will not mind. He has a big coop at the ranch." They ate the eggs and the last of the bread Caroline had, then began the process of packing up her few belongings. It did not take long. Everything she owned in the world fit into 2 small bags and a trunk. Samuel loaded everything onto his horse, securing it carefully, then helped Caroline up into the saddle. He would walk alongside them, he said. The horse could not carry both riders and all the supplies, especially not through the snow. As they left the cabin behind, Caroline turned back to look at it one last time. It had been her home for 3 years, the place where she had cared for her dying father, the place where she had felt her most desperate and alone. But it was also the place where she had prayed for a miracle and received one. She would not forget that. The journey to the Triple Creek Ranch took most of the day. Samuel was a man of few words, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. He pointed out landmarks as they went, telling her about the land and the ranch and the people who worked there. Mr. Harrison was 60 years old, a widower with 2 grown sons who lived back east. He ran the ranch with the help of about a dozen hands, and by all accounts, he was a fair employer who paid well and treated his workers with respect. "What about you?" Caroline asked as they walked. "How long have you worked there?" 5 years, Samuel said. "I came to Texas from Colorado. I was drifting, mostly, doing odd jobs wherever I could find them. Mr. Harrison hired me on during a roundup and I just stayed. It is a good place to work." "You have family back in Colorado," Samuel's expression darkened slightly. "No, no family anywhere." Caroline recognized the tone in his voice. It was the same one she had when she talked about being alone. "I am sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago," Samuel replied, but she could tell it still hurt. They did not talk about it anymore. The Triple Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun was beginning to set. It was bigger than Caroline had expected, with a large main house, several bunkhouses, a massive barn, and numerous corrals and outbuildings. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and she could see men moving about, tending to the evening chores. Samuel led her straight to the main house and knocked on the door. It was answered by a tall, gray-haired man with a weathered face and kind eyes. This was clearly Mr. Harrison. "Samuel," the older man said, surprised, "I was starting to worry about you. You have been gone since yesterday." "I am sorry, sir. I got turned around in the storm and ended up near Marfa. That is where I found Miss Bishop here." Samuel gestured to Caroline, who had dismounted and was standing nervously beside the horse. "Her father just passed, and she has no family. She is looking for work. I thought maybe you could use some help around the house." Mr. Harrison looked at Caroline with those kind eyes, taking in her worn dress and her thin frame and the exhaustion written all over her face. "Come inside, both of you," he said. "It is too cold to be standing out here talking." The main house was warm and spacious, with a large fireplace and comfortable furniture. Mr. Harrison gestured for Caroline to sit, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned a few minutes later with coffee and a plate of cold chicken and biscuits. "Eat," he said, setting the plate in front of her. "You look like you need it." While Caroline ate, Samuel explained the situation in more detail. He told Mr. Harrison about finding her in the snow, about her father's death, about the cabin and the few belongings she had. He spoke matter-of-factly without embellishment, but the compassion in his voice was clear. Mr. Harrison listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When Samuel finished, the older man turned to Caroline. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir," Caroline said. "My mother taught me before she passed when I was 12. I have been cooking and keeping house ever since." "Can you manage a large household?" "There are 14 men on this ranch, including myself, and they all need feeding 3 times a day." "I can manage it, sir." "I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." Mr. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, you are hired. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. There is a small bedroom off the kitchen that you can use. I expect breakfast on the table at 6 in the morning, lunch at noon, and dinner at 6 in the evening. The men will help with heavy lifting and chopping and such, but the cooking and cleaning are your responsibility." "Does that sound fair?" Caroline could barely believe what she was hearing. $30 a month was more than she had dared to hope for. "Yes, sir, that sounds more than fair. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," Mr. Harrison said with a wry smile. "Wait until you have been feeding 14 hungry cowboys for a week. You might change your mind." But Caroline knew she would not change her mind. This was the miracle she had prayed for, and she was going to hold on to it with everything she had. Samuel helped her move her things into the small bedroom. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a small window that looked out over the corrals. After living in the tiny, cramped cabin, it felt like a palace. "I will be in the bunkhouse if you need anything," Samuel said, standing in the doorway. "It is the building closest to the barn. You cannot miss it." "Thank you," Caroline said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for what you have done for me." Samuel shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. I am just glad I was there when you needed help." He hesitated, then added, "I will see you at breakfast tomorrow." After he left, Caroline sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry. But these were not tears of despair or fear. They were tears of relief and gratitude. She had been on her knees in the snow, praying for a miracle, and God had sent her Samuel Vance, a lonely cowboy who had gotten lost in a storm and found her instead. The next morning, Caroline woke before dawn and immediately went to work. The kitchen was well stocked, with plenty of flour and salt and bacon and eggs. She built up the fire in the big stove and started making biscuits, then got bacon frying and eggs scrambling. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, she had a full breakfast ready. The men came in slowly, stamping snow off their boots and talking amongst themselves. They eyed Caroline with curiosity but were polite enough. Samuel came in last, giving her a small nod before taking his seat at the long table. The food disappeared quickly, and Caroline found herself feeling a sense of pride she had not felt in a long time. The men complimented her cooking, and Mr. Harrison told her she had done a fine job. It was a good start. The days began to blur together in the best way possible. Caroline threw herself into her work, cooking and cleaning and managing the household with a dedication that impressed even Mr. Harrison. The men were respectful and appreciative, and she began to learn their names and personalities. There was old Pete, the foreman, who was gruff but kind. There was young Tommy, who could not have been more than 19 and was always hungry. There was Miguel, who spoke with a thick accent and told wonderful stories about growing up in Mexico. And then there was Samuel. He was different from the others. He was quieter, more reserved, but there was a depth to him that Caroline found herself drawn to. He was always polite, always respectful, but he also seemed to go out of his way to check on her. He would bring in extra firewood without being asked. He would offer to help with heavy pots or bags of flour. He never said much, but his actions spoke volumes. Caroline found herself looking forward to mealtimes, when she would see him sitting at the table with the other men. She noticed things about him, like the way he always helped clear the dishes, or the way he smiled when old Pete told one of his tall tales. She noticed the way his eyes would find hers across the room, and the way her heart would skip a beat when they did. 3 weeks after she arrived at the ranch, Caroline was outside feeding the chickens when Samuel approached her. It was late afternoon, and most of the men were out working the cattle. "Miss Bishop," he said, his hat in his hands, "I was wondering if I could talk to you for a moment." "Of course," Caroline said, setting down the bucket of feed. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Samuel said quickly. "I just wanted to check on you, see how you are settling in." "I am settling in very well," Caroline said with a smile. "Everyone has been so kind." "I cannot thank you enough for bringing me here." Samuel looked down at his hat, turning it over in his hands. "I am glad it worked out. You are doing a fine job. Mr. Harrison told me yesterday that the men have never eaten so well." Caroline felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. "That is kind of him to say." There was a pause, and then Samuel said, "I was also wondering if you might want to take a walk with me sometime. Just around the ranch, I mean, so I can show you around properly. There is a nice spot by the creek that is real pretty when the sun is setting." Caroline's heart began to race. She knew what this was. This was Samuel asking to spend time with her to get to know her better. And she realized with a sudden clarity that took her breath away that she wanted that more than anything. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Samuel's face broke into a smile, that same transformative smile she had seen once before. "How about tomorrow evening after dinner?" "Tomorrow evening sounds perfect." That night Caroline could barely sleep. She kept thinking about Samuel, about the way he had looked at her, about the quiet kindness he had shown her from the very beginning. She thought about the fact that he had saved her life, quite literally, and that he had given her a second chance when she had nothing left. But more than that, she thought about the man himself, his strength, his gentleness, his quiet competence. She thought about how safe she felt around him, and how her heart seemed to come alive whenever he was near. The next evening could not come fast enough. Caroline prepared dinner with extra care, making a beef stew that she knew the men loved and baking fresh bread to go with it. When the meal was done and the dishes were cleared, she changed into her only good dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Then she met Samuel outside, and together they began to walk. The ranch was beautiful in the fading light. The snow had mostly melted, leaving behind patches of brown grass and mud, but the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange and purple. Samuel led her along a well-worn path that wound past the corrals and the barn and out toward a line of trees in the distance. The creek is just beyond those trees, he explained. It does not look like much right now because of the cold, but in the spring and summer, it is real nice. There are wildflowers everywhere, and the water is cool and clear. It sounds lovely, Caroline said. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. Then Samuel said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day I found you. You said you were praying for a miracle. Do you really think that is what it was?" "A miracle?" Caroline considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "I do. I know some people might say it was just coincidence that you happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I do not believe in coincidences like that. I think God heard my prayer, and He sent you to help me." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I am not a very religious man, Miss Bishop. I have seen too much hardness in this world to have much faith left. But if what happened was a miracle, then I am glad I could be part of it. I am glad I found you." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that Caroline had not heard before. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I am glad you found me too," she said. "More glad than I can put into words." Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, and Caroline felt like he was seeing all the way into her soul. "I have been alone for a long time," he said quietly. "I did not think I would ever feel connected to anyone again. But then I met you, and something changed. I cannot stop thinking about you, Miss Bishop. I know it has not been very long, and I know I probably should not be saying any of this, but I cannot help it. You mean something to me." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "You mean something to me too," she whispered. "From the moment you helped me, from the moment you showed me such kindness, I have felt something. I did not know what to call it at first, but I think I do now." "What do you call it?" Samuel asked, stepping closer. "Hope," Caroline said. "You made me feel hopeful again. And more than that, you made me feel like maybe I could have a future, like maybe I was not as alone as I thought." Samuel reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was rough and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "You are not alone," he said. "Not anymore. Not ever again if I have anything to say about it." They stood there, hands clasped, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. And in that moment, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that her prayers had been answered in ways she never could have imagined. She had asked for help, for a way forward, and God had given her so much more. He had given her Samuel. Over the following weeks, Caroline and Samuel spent every spare moment together. Samuel would find excuses to come to the main house during the day, offering to help with this or that. Caroline would make sure to save him the best portions of food, smiling at him as she set his plate down. In the evenings, they would take walks together, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes just enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. They learned each other's stories. Samuel told her about growing up in Colorado, about losing his parents to a fire when he was 17, about the years he had spent drifting and trying to find a place where he belonged. Caroline told him about her mother's death, about the years she had spent caring for her ailing father, about the fear and loneliness she had felt in those final days before Samuel found her. "I think we found each other," Samuel said one evening as they sat by the creek. The weather was getting warmer, and the first hints of spring were beginning to show. "I think we were both lost, and somehow we managed to find each other. I used to wonder why God let so many bad things happen to me," Caroline admitted. "I used to question why He took my mother, why He let my father get sick, why He left me alone. But now I think maybe it was all leading to this. To you. Maybe I had to go through all of that so I would be in that cabin, on my knees in the snow when you rode by." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Then I am grateful for all of it," he said. Because it brought you to me. By the time spring arrived in full, everyone on the ranch knew that Samuel and Caroline were courting. The men teased Samuel good-naturedly, and Mr. Harrison watched them with approval. One evening, after dinner had been cleared and the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Mr. Harrison asked Caroline to sit with him in the parlor. "You have been with us for 3 months now," he said, settling into his chair. "And in that time, you have become an indispensable part of this ranch. The men are happy, the house is running smoothly, and I have not had to worry about a single thing. You have exceeded every expectation I had." "Thank you, sir," Caroline said, pleased by the praise. "I have also noticed that you and Samuel have grown close," Mr. Harrison continued. "Very close, if I am not mistaken." Caroline felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, sir, we have," Mr. Harrison nodded. "Samuel is a good man. One of the best I have ever known. He is honest and hardworking, and he has a good heart. If he is courting you with honorable intentions, then you have my blessing." "He is courting me with very honorable intentions," Caroline assured him. "He has been nothing but respectful." "I am glad to hear it," Mr. Harrison said. "You deserve to be happy, Miss Bishop. You have had a hard life and you deserve some joy." That night, as Caroline lay in bed, she thought about Mr. Harrison's words. She thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. 3 months ago, she had been on her knees in the snow, freezing and desperate and completely alone. Now she had a home, a job, friends, and most importantly, she had Samuel. She had someone who cared about her, who saw her and valued her and wanted to build a life with her. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. It was everything. 2 weeks later, Samuel asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek, watching the sunset, when he suddenly stood up and pulled her to her feet. "Caroline," he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "I know we have not known each other very long, only a few months. But in that time, you have become the most important person in my world. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I do not want to imagine it. You are my miracle, just like I was yours. Will you marry me?" Caroline felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." Samuel let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. Then he set her down and kissed her, and it was the sweetest, most perfect kiss Caroline had ever imagined. It tasted like hope and joy and the promise of a future filled with love. They were married a month later in a small ceremony in Marfa. Mr. Harrison gave Caroline away, and all the ranch hands attended, dressed in their best clothes and grinning like fools. The local preacher officiated, and Caroline wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself from fabric Mr. Harrison had given her as a wedding gift. As she stood before Samuel, holding his hands and looking into his eyes, Caroline thought back to that day in the snow. She thought about how desperate she had been, how utterly lost and alone. And she thought about how Samuel had appeared out of the storm like an answer to a prayer. He had saved her life, but more than that, he had given her a reason to live. "I love you," she whispered as the preacher pronounced them man and wife. "I love you too," Samuel whispered back. "Always." After the wedding, Mr. Harrison surprised them with a gift. He had one of the smaller houses on the ranch property, a 2-room cabin that had been empty for years. He had the men fix it up, repairing the roof and the walls and putting in new windows. He furnished it with a bed and a table and chairs, and he told Samuel and Caroline that it was theirs for as long as they worked on the ranch. "Every couple needs their own home," he said gruffly. "It is not much, but it is yours." Caroline cried when she saw it. It was small and simple, but it was theirs. A home. A real home. They moved in that same day, and that night as they lay together in their own bed in their own house, Caroline felt a sense of peace and contentment that she had never known before. Samuel held her close, his arms strong and warm around her, and she knew that she was finally, truly home. Life on the Triple Creek Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Caroline continued to cook for the ranch hands, but now she had Samuel coming home to her every evening. They would eat dinner together in their little cabin, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Samuel was saving money with the goal of eventually buying a small piece of land where they could start their own ranch. Caroline supported him completely, adding her own wages to their savings. The first winter of their marriage was cold but joyful. They would spend the long evenings by the fire, Samuel whittling and Caroline mending clothes or reading aloud from the few books they owned. They talked about everything and nothing, and Caroline marveled at how easy it was to be with him. There was no pretense, no games, just honest affection and companionship. In the spring, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a huge smile broke across his face, and he picked her up and spun her around just like he had when she had agreed to marry him. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Caroline, we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, laughing through happy tears. Samuel set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Do you feel all right? Should you be working so hard?" "I am fine," Caroline assured him. "The doctor in town says I am healthy and everything looks good, but I might need to cut back on some of the heavier work as I get further along." "You will cut back on all the heavy work," Samuel said firmly. "I will talk to Mr. Harrison tomorrow. We will figure something out." Mr. Harrison was delighted by the news. He immediately hired a young woman from town to help Caroline with the cooking and cleaning, insisting that Caroline needed to take care of herself and the baby. The other ranch hands were excited too, already making plans to build a cradle and talking about teaching the baby to ride when he or she was old enough. Caroline's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She grew round and glowing, and Samuel became even more protective than before. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work too long on her feet. He would rub her back when it ached and make sure she was eating enough. His tenderness and care made Caroline fall even more deeply in love with him. Their son was born on a clear October morning in 1884. The birth was long and difficult, but Caroline was strong, and when she finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. Samuel was there with her, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when the midwife placed their son in Caroline's arms, they both wept with joy. They named him James Harrison Vance, after Mr. Harrison, who had given them both so much. He was a healthy, beautiful baby with dark hair like his father and blue eyes like his mother. Samuel held him with such tenderness and awe that Caroline's heart felt like it might burst. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, gazing down at his son. "He is absolutely perfect." "He is," Caroline agreed. "Our miracle." Motherhood suited Caroline. She loved everything about caring for James, from nursing him to singing him lullabies to watching him grow and change each day. Samuel was a devoted father, coming home every evening eager to hold his son and play with him. He would talk to James about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when James was older. When James was 6 months old, Samuel came home one evening with a serious expression on his face. Caroline felt a flutter of worry, but he quickly reassured her. "I have been talking to Mr. Harrison," Samuel said. "He is getting older, and his sons back east have no interest in the ranch. He has been thinking about his future, about what will happen to this place when he is gone." "What did he say?" Caroline asked. He offered to sell me a portion of the ranch, 500 acres on the eastern edge, along with 50 head of cattle. He would carry the note, letting us pay it off over time. It is a good offer, Caroline, a really good offer. We could have our own place, build our own herd. We could make something for ourselves, for James. Caroline's heart began to race. How much would it cost? Samuel told her the amount, and Caroline quickly did the math in her head. It was a lot of money, but with their combined savings and the payment plan Mr. Harrison was offering, it was actually feasible. "I think we should do it," she said. "I think we should take the chance." Samuel's face broke into a grin. "Really, really," Caroline confirmed. "You have been dreaming about having your own ranch since I met you. This is our opportunity. We would be fools not to take it." They shook hands with Mr. Harrison the next day, and just like that, Samuel and Caroline became landowners. It was a momentous occasion, one that neither of them had ever truly believed would happen. They spent the next several months working harder than they ever had before, building a modest house on their new property and starting to build their herd. It was exhausting work, but it was also exhilarating. They were building something together, creating a legacy for their son and any future children they might have. Mr. Harrison and the ranch hands helped whenever they could, and slowly but surely, the Vance Ranch began to take shape. 2 years later, Caroline gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Ellen Vance. She was as beautiful as her brother, with her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. James grew into a smart, curious boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, but just as passionate about the life they were building. Samuel and Caroline added to their herd slowly but steadily, and the Vance Ranch became known in the area for quality cattle and honest dealing. Through it all, Samuel and Caroline's love for each other only deepened. They faced hardships together, including a drought one year that nearly wiped them out and a winter so harsh they lost a dozen head of cattle. But they always faced these challenges as a team, supporting each other and never giving up. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Caroline back to the spot where he had first found her. The old cabin was still there, though it was even more dilapidated now. They stood in the spot where she had been on her knees in the snow, and Caroline felt a rush of emotion. "Do you remember what you were praying for?" Samuel asked. "A miracle," Caroline said softly. "I was praying for a miracle." "And you got one," Samuel said, pulling her close. "But the truth is, Caroline, you were my miracle too. I was lost before I found you. I was just going through the motions of life, not really living. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to wake up happy every morning." Caroline looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "We saved each other," she said. "We did," Samuel agreed. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They kissed there in the snow, in the same spot where their story had begun 10 years earlier. And Caroline thought about how impossible it all had seemed back then, how utterly hopeless she had felt. She had been praying for a sign, for some way forward, and God had sent her Samuel, a lonely cowboy who had gotten lost in a storm and found her instead. As they rode back to their ranch, Caroline looked out over the land they had built together. She saw the house they had constructed with their own hands, the corrals filled with cattle, the barn where the children's ponies were kept. She saw James and Grace playing in the yard, watched over by the hired hand they had taken on the year before. She saw the garden she had planted, now dormant for the winter but which would bloom beautifully in the spring. This was her miracle. Not just Samuel, though he was certainly the beginning of it. Her miracle was the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that sustained them through every trial and tribulation. Her miracle was waking up each morning next to the man she loved and going to sleep each night knowing that she was home. Samuel reached over and took her hand as they rode, and Caroline squeezed it gently. She thought about that desperate young woman on her knees in the snow, praying for help. She wished she could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right. That help was on the way. That a lonely cowboy would come riding out of the storm and change her life forever. But she could not go back, and that was all right too. Because the present was so much better than she ever could have imagined. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a capable young man who shared his father's work ethic and his mother's compassionate heart. At 15, he could rope and ride as well as any of the hands, and he had a natural talent for working with cattle. Grace, at 13, was showing an interest in numbers and bookkeeping, and Caroline began teaching her how to manage the ranch's accounts. The Vance ranch continued to grow. They added more land, expanded their herd, and eventually built a larger house to accommodate their growing family and the occasional guests. Samuel's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread throughout West Texas, and buyers came from as far as Fort Worth to purchase his cattle. But despite their success, Samuel and Caroline never forgot where they had come from. They helped others whenever they could, offering jobs to drifters who needed work, feeding families who were struggling, always remembering that they had once been desperate themselves. Caroline often thought about the prayer she had offered that day in the snow, and she tried to be the answer to someone else's prayer whenever possible. Mr. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 75 years old. Samuel and Caroline were devastated. He had been like a father to both of them, the one who had given them their start and supported them through everything. They inherited a portion of his estate, which they used to establish a scholarship fund for young people in Marfa who wanted to learn ranching or attend school back east. On the day of Mr. Harrison's funeral, Caroline stood beside Samuel and thought about how many lives the old rancher had touched. He had given her a job when she had nothing. He had supported her relationship with Samuel. He had sold them their first land and helped them build their ranch. He had been a grandfather to James and Grace. His kindness had rippled out in ways he probably never fully understood. "We owe him everything," Samuel said quietly as they stood beside the grave. "We do," Caroline agreed. "And the best way to honor him is to keep doing what he taught us. To be kind, to give people chances, to build something good and lasting." As their children grew into adulthood, Samuel and Caroline found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They would take long rides across their property, hand in hand, talking about their memories and their dreams for the future. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. James married a local girl named Sarah when he was 22. And they gave Samuel and Caroline their first grandchild the following year, a boy they named Samuel Harrison Vance after his grandfather and great-grandfather. Grace married at 20 to a teacher from Fort Davis, and they settled nearby so she could still help with the ranch accounts. Samuel and Caroline embraced their roles as grandparents with joy. They loved having the grandchildren visit, loved teaching them to ride and telling them stories about the old days. Caroline would make special treats for them, and Samuel would take them out to see the cattle and explain how the ranch worked. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. Friends and neighbors came from all over the county, filling the ranch with laughter and music and good food. There were speeches and toasts, and more than one person commented on what a remarkable love story Samuel and Caroline had. "Tell us how you met," someone called out, and the room grew quiet as everyone waited to hear the story. Samuel looked at Caroline and she nodded, giving him permission to tell it. He stood up, holding his glass of punch, and began. 25 years ago, I was riding through a snowstorm, lost and cold and wondering if I would ever find my way. Then I saw something that did not make sense. A woman on her knees in the snow, praying. I rode over to help her, and that woman was Caroline. He paused, looking at his wife with such love that Caroline felt tears spring to her eyes. She told me she was praying for a miracle, Samuel continued. She had lost everything and had nowhere to turn. She was asking God for help, for some sign that she was not alone. And I have thought about that day many times over the years, about the storm that got me lost, about the path that led me to her cabin, about the timing of it all. And I have come to believe that miracles are real, because I was her miracle that day and she was mine. Finding Caroline saved me just as much as I saved her. She gave me a purpose, a family, a reason to build something lasting. She made me whole. The room erupted in applause and Caroline stood up and hugged her husband tightly. "I love you," she whispered in his ear. "I have loved you from the moment you appeared out of that storm." "And I have loved you from the moment I saw you in the snow," Samuel whispered back. "My brave, beautiful miracle." As the party continued around them, Samuel and Caroline slipped away to take a quiet walk. They walked to the spot where their original little cabin had stood, the one Mr. Harrison had given them as a wedding present. It was gone now, replaced by a newer, larger building that served as the ranch office. But they could still remember every detail of that tiny home, their first home together. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Caroline asked. "If you had not gotten lost that day? If you had not found me?" "I try not to," Samuel admitted. "Because thinking about a life without you in it is too painful, but I will say this. If I had to get lost 1,000 times, if I had to ride through 1,000 storms, I would do it all again just to find you." Caroline leaned against him, feeling his strength and warmth. "We have built a good life," she said. "A really good life." "The best life," Samuel agreed. They stood there for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. And Caroline thought about that desperate, frozen girl who had been praying in the snow so many years ago. She thought about how impossible everything had seemed, how hopeless she had felt. And she marveled at how God had answered her prayer in ways she never could have imagined. She had asked for help and God had sent Samuel. But he had not just sent help, he had sent love. He had sent a partner, a companion, a soulmate. He had sent someone who would stand beside her through every challenge and celebration, someone who would build a life and a family and a legacy with her. Her miracle had not been a single moment. It had been a lifetime. As Caroline and Samuel grew older, they began to slowly hand over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to James and his wife Sarah. Samuel was in his 50s now, and while he was still strong and capable, he was also ready to enjoy a slower pace of life. Caroline felt the same way. They had worked hard for 3 decades, and they had earned the right to rest. They built a smaller house on a quiet corner of the property, with a wide porch and a view of the mountains in the distance. Samuel made Caroline a rocking chair, and they would sit together in the evenings, watching the world go by. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the past, or discussing the latest news from their children and grandchildren. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, content in each other's presence. Caroline took up quilting, creating beautiful pieces that she gave to her grandchildren. Samuel spent his time carving, making toys for the great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive. They attended church every Sunday in Marfa, and they were active in the community, always ready to help with fundraisers or social events. Their love story became something of a legend in the area. Young couples would ask them for advice on marriage, and Samuel and Caroline would always say the same thing. Love is a choice you make every day. It is not just a feeling. It is a commitment to stand by each other, to support each other, to forgive each other, to build something together. The greatest gift you can give your spouse, Caroline would say, is your presence, your full, undivided presence. In the good times and the bad times, be there. And never forget why you fell in love in the first place, Samuel would add. When things get hard, and they will get hard, remember what drew you together. Remember the feeling of those early days. Hold on to that. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There were nearly 50 people there, including children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and various extended family and friends. A local photographer came out and took pictures, capturing the moment for posterity. In one of those pictures, Samuel and Caroline are standing together in front of the main house, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. They are both smiling, their faces lined with age but their eyes still bright with love. Behind them, their family spreads out in a wide semicircle, multiple generations of Vances who would not exist if not for a prayer in the snow and a lost cowboy who found his way. Caroline had that picture framed and hung it in their little house, where she could see it every day. She would look at it and marvel at the journey they had taken, from that desperate moment in the snow to this beautiful, full life. From being completely alone to being surrounded by love. Samuel's health began to decline when he was in his late 60s. It was nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for many years. His joints ached, and he tired more easily. But his mind was still sharp, and his love for Caroline was as strong as ever. Caroline cared for him tenderly, making sure he took his medicine and ate properly and did not overexert himself. She would read to him in the evenings, his favorite books and passages from the Bible. She would hold his hand and tell him stories about their life together, reminding him of all the beautiful moments they had shared. "I am a lucky man," Samuel would say often. "The luckiest man who ever lived." "We are both lucky," Caroline would reply. "We found each other when we both needed finding." One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Samuel turned to Caroline with a serious expression. "I want you to know something," he said. "If I could go back and live my life over again, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, because every moment, good and bad, led me to you, and you have been the greatest blessing of my life." Caroline felt tears streaming down her face. "You have been my blessing too," she said. "My miracle, my answer to prayer." Samuel pulled her close, and they sat there together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear. The same stars that had watched over them that night by the creek when Samuel had first told her she meant something to him. The same stars that had shone on their wedding day. The same stars that had witnessed every moment of their long, beautiful life together. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 70. Caroline woke up that morning to find him still beside her, looking peaceful and content. She held his hand and cried, her heart breaking even as she gave thanks for the 50 years they had been given. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Texas to pay their respects. Samuel had been a well-known and well-respected figure in the ranching community, but more than that, he had been a good man, a kind man, a man who had made a difference in the lives of everyone he met. Caroline stood beside his grave and thought about the day they had met. She thought about that lonely cowboy riding through the snow, about the way he had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayer. She thought about how he had saved her life, given her a home, loved her unconditionally for 50 years. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky. "Thank you for sending him to me. Thank you for every moment we had together." In the years that followed, Caroline found comfort in her family and her memories. She moved in with James and Sarah, who took excellent care of her. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the life they had built together. She returned often to the spot where Samuel had found her, where she had been on her knees in the snow praying for a miracle. It was a sacred place to her, the place where her new life had begun. She would stand there and remember that desperate young woman, and she would think about how far she had come. Caroline lived to be 87 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When her time came, she died peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were about Samuel, about how she was ready to see him again, about how she had missed him every day since he had been gone. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. On her headstone, the family inscribed the words she prayed for a miracle, and he answered. On his, they wrote, "A lonely cowboy who found his home." And if you visit that spot today, you will see those two graves side by side, looking out over the land that 4 generations of Vances have now called home. You will see the ranch that started with a prayer and a lost cowboy and grew into something lasting and beautiful. You will see the legacy of love that Samuel and Caroline built, a legacy that continues to ripple out through their descendants and the community they helped shape. Because that is the thing about miracles. They do not just happen in a single moment. They continue, growing and spreading and touching lives in ways that can never be fully measured. Caroline had prayed for help, and God had sent Samuel, but their miracle did not end with them. It continued through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the ranch they built and the community they served, through the love they showed each other, and the example they set for everyone who knew them. On snowy winter evenings when the wind blows cold across the Texas plains, some folks say you can still see them. A cowboy and his lady, riding together across the land they loved, hand in hand, forever bound by the miracle that brought them together. It is just a story, of course, the kind of romantic tale that people love to tell. But those who knew Samuel and Caroline, who witnessed their love and benefited from their kindness, know that the real miracle was not some ghostly vision. The real miracle was the life they built together. The real miracle was the love that sustained them through 50 years of marriage. The real miracle was that on a desperate, frozen day in 1883, a young woman prayed for help, and a lonely cowboy got lost in a storm. And somehow, impossibly, perfectly, they found each other. And that miracle echoes still, in every marriage that lasts, in every act of kindness shown to a stranger, in every prayer offered in desperation and answered in ways we never expect. Caroline Bishop and Samuel Vance proved that miracles are real, that love can save us, that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find what we have been searching for all along. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they shared and the legacy they built will never truly fade. It lives on in the land, in the family, in the memories passed down from generation to generation. It lives on in the hearts of everyone who hears their story and dares to believe that miracles still happen, that love still conquers, that prayers are still answered. Caroline had been praying in the snow for a miracle, and the lonely cowboy became her answer. But in truth, they became each other's answer. Two lost souls who found each other in the midst of a storm and built something beautiful that lasted long after the snow had melted and the storm had passed. And that, more than anything else, is the true measure of a miracle. Not that it happens once in a single spectacular moment, but that it continues, day after day, year after year, touching lives and changing hearts and proving that love, real love, is the greatest miracle of all.